Brilliant. So in the Church of, this isn't particularly interesting, but in the Church of England's calendar of reading through the scriptures, we go from the birth story of Jesus, that's what we're looking at Christmas, straight into the baptism of Jesus and the start of Jesus' new ministry, the start of his new year, the start of a new chapter for him. So we just want to look this morning a little bit at particularly this idea of finding your voice, but whose voice are you listening to? Now, I just want you to think for a moment. You can get your ear trumpet out if that helps. If you want to roll those up, kids, and put them to your ear. But I just want you to have a little think while you're doing that. Whose voice do you listen to the most? Or whose voice is most important in your life? Or whose voice has the biggest influence upon you? And as adults, you don't need to stick an ear trumpet to your ear, although feel very welcome to do so. But the same question applies. Whose voice has the biggest impact on your life? And we're not looking for the right answer here. It doesn't have to, I'm not asking, but in reality, which voices or whose voices speak into your life in a good way or in a bad way the most? It might be family, it might be mum and dad, it might be friends, it might be the mobile phone scrolling through TikTok and Snap. Is that speaking into your life? Is that voice actually having a bigger influence into your life than anything else? It might be all kinds of voices that are speaking into your life, some good and some bad. And the thing about the voices that we hear or the voices we choose to listen to is they can massively shape us, and they can massively shape the voice that we in turn have for others. So that question, whose voice do you listen to the most, is a really important question. And I want you to imagine, you saw a little bit on the video there, but Jesus, he's probably about 30 years old at this point. He's grown up. His mum and his dad have had a voice. We read that he went to the temple, so he's obviously hearing God's voice as well. And then imagine he's on the side of the river, and there's all these voices, all these crowds around. Some people will be expecting Jesus to do this. Some people will be saying, Jesus, you need to do that. John the Baptist is saying to him, no, don't get baptized. There's all these voices crowding in on Jesus. Which one does he listen to? And then we hear Jesus is baptized. And it's like as he goes down, I don't know if any of you have ever had a bath. I'm assuming most of you have. I hope most of you have. Or the swimming pool. But as you go down into the water, you can't hear anything else. Everything fades into a kind of muffle. It's just you and your thoughts. And Jesus goes down in the water, and all the other voices get drowned out. But as he comes up out of the water, we read that the first voice he hears is God's voice speaking to him. God's voice speaking to him. And I just want you to think at the start of this new year, whether you're 3 or 4 or 5 or 55 or 85, what would it look like this year to make sure that God's voice is the first voice you hear, the most important voice you hear and that you're listening to? That takes more importance over any other voice. How do you position yourself in a way that you hear God's voice? Are you reading your Bible every day? Are mum and dad helping you pray every day? Are we taking time maybe to think about joining a neighbour hub? Sign-ups go live today on our website, or a small group, or a kids cell, or a youth cell. Are we positioning ourselves so that we're in a place where we can hear God's voice above all the other voices around us? I want you just to unwrap your piece of paper, and there's a pen under your seats as well. Adults, if you want to do this one as well, there's a pen under your seats. Because it wasn't just that Jesus heard God's voice, but what God said to Jesus was really important too. Can anyone remember what God says to Jesus? What are the first words that Jesus hears in this new chapter that he hears God speaking? Does anyone remember? Great. You are my beloved son is the first part. Second part. With you I am well pleased. You are my beloved Son. With you I am well pleased. Before Jesus goes on to do anything, before he heals someone, before he preaches a sermon, before he goes to and does anything, the first thing that God says to him is, I love you. I love you. With you, I am so pleased. I take such joy and pleasure in who you are. You see, what's really important is that Jesus doesn't just hear God's voice, but he hears God's voice saying to him who he is. And interestingly, those words, you are my beloved Son, and with you I'm well pleased, they echo back. The people hearing that on the riverbank would have been reminded of two scriptures in the Old Testament. Psalm 2, verse 7, which was all about being a king, and Isaiah 42, which was all about being a servant. So Jesus, as he hears God's voice, hears that he's loved before he even does anything, but then he hears God saying to him, this is my purpose that I have for you. You're to be a loved child of God, and you're to be a servant king to my people. And my question for us is, what is God saying to you and about you at the start of this year? If you were going to write down what God is saying to you at the start of this year about who you are and the things he's got for you, what would you be writing down? So I just want you to take a couple of moments. Maybe if you're in a family group, have a bit of a chat about that. If you're with housemates, have a chat about that. If you're a total introvert as well, you don't need to do any of that. But wherever you are, by yourself or in groups, if that's helpful, just have a little think and a little chat. At the start of this year, if you like, as you come into a new year out of the water, what is it that God says about you and says about his plans and his purposes for you this year? If it's easier, you can draw a picture as well, that's fine. If you're at home watching online, then obviously this is something you can join in with as well. What is God saying? What does God say about you? Now, I realise in this situation we've not got loads of time to do that. But I'd really encourage you to go home and have a bit of a think about this. Read some scriptures, read some promises. Notice what God says about you and says for you. I'll give you a clue. If you can't think of anything, God, as he speaks this over Jesus, is actually speaking this over the whole of Israel as well, because Jesus represents the people of God. So not only is he saying to Jesus, but he's saying to all of God's people, I love you. You are my beloved. With you, before you do anything, with you, I am well pleased. You give me such joy. So if you don't know what to write on your piece of paper, that is a really good start, and it's a fact. That's what God says to you as part of the people of God. I love you. I love you. With you, I am so pleased. If you want to just grab your piece of paper again and roll them again into some sort of cone shape. This is awful what I'm doing, but I'm doing it with one hand. And if you remember, as we were praying, we went from hearing God. We've just recognized the things God says to us and about us. And the next thing is a megaphone. Oh, that works. Does it, Josh? Can I sing in your band? Thanks. We say so many things to different people. We use our voice in so many different ways, whether it's in the playground having fun, whether it's to be mean to somebody, whether it's to speak out about things that are wrong in the world, whether it's to tell someone about Jesus. We use our voice in so many different ways, some good, some bad. And I want us to think this year again, how are we going to use our voice? How are we going to use our voice. And you know, I was going to say it's a secret. It's not really a secret. It's blindingly obvious. But the more that we listen to God's voice and what he says about us, the more that changes our voice. The things we listen to, the voices we pay attention to, will change the voice we have, consciously and subconsciously. The voices that we listen to will impact the voice that we have. And so the more we hear God's voice saying, you are loved, with you I'm well pleased, the more that our voice will be a voice of love, telling people out there that they are loved, that there is joy to be found, and that with them God takes great pleasure. So just to finish off, on your chairs or under your chairs or halfway down your leg by now, there is a little cord, a leather cord. If you're at home, you can just grab a piece of string to do this. But there's a leather cord. And as part of our week of prayer, what I'd love you to do is tie in, I don't know, 1 knot, 2 knots, up to 5 different knots. And we're going to put them around our wrist. And they're a reminder that over this next week, until next Sunday, or you can keep it beyond, we want to use our voice to reflect God's voice. And so you might want to tie a knot and think of one person at school, or one person at uni, or one person in your workplace, or one person that you know that you would love to share about Jesus with. You might want to invite them to the Alpha course starting on the 27th. You might want to invite them to the next kids party that's happening. You might just want an opportunity to say, can I pray for you? But tie a knot in and think of that one person that you want to use your voice to tell them you're loved. There's a God that loves you. You might want to tie in another one for another friend or another person, or there may be a situation where you just want to have the courage to speak out God's voice, stand up for something that's wrong. Maybe at school, maybe you need to write a letter to the MP, maybe there's something else that you know the Spirit's just asked you to tie another knot and pray about that this week. So I'd encourage you to go home with your piece of paper, write some stuff down on it, listen this week. What does God want to say to me? And I'd encourage you to put the band around your wrist and use it as a way of praying this week that your voice would reflect God's voice. Just finally, to finish, on the way out as well, you will be given a bulb, as in a flower bulb, not a light bulb. That is because on Friday, on our prayer blog, stswithens.org/arise and shine, there's a little prayer activity for us to do involving the bulb as well. So stswithens.org/arise and shine. So do grab one of those on the way out. But I just want to finish again by asking, whose voice are you listening to? Because that voice or those voices are going to shape who you are and the voice in turn that you have for others. So let's stand together, if we may. I know you're busy knotting your bands. That's great. Carry on doing that. And we're just going to spend a few moments just asking the Spirit of Jesus just to come again and remind us who we are. That would help us to hear his voice above the noise of all the other voices at the start of this year.